tunnel and have come out into an area that the early Christians actually thought was the Pool of Shiloach. In just a few minutes we'll go and show you where the Pool of Shiloach really was. That's the Pool of Siloam, the place where Yeshua tells the blind man to go and wash the mud off his eyes so that he can see again. So the early Christians actually built a church in this area. So this is very interesting because it shows us that they were a couple of hundred meters off, but they were basically in the right area. And maybe that's the case with other sites in the land. So the tunnel that I've just come out of here is 533 meters long, or around 1,600 feet. It's around 50 meters below ground level, or around 160 feet below ground level. It was built during the time that Hezekiah was king in Jerusalem, so around 2,700 years ago. And we found an inscription inside of the tunnel. It's called the Shiloach inscription, and it actually tells us that two teams of workers built this tunnel deep underground 2,700 years ago, and the tunnel is not straight, it goes like this. And somehow, miraculously, they met in the middle. And nobody knows how. Were they following a natural line of weakness in the rock? Were they following the path that the spring led the water down to the valley? Or perhaps they were using some type of sonar equipment on top. Perhaps they were banging with a hammer on the ground level and listening below the ground to hear where the hammer was so that they would know which direction to go in. Now there are two tunnel systems in this area, the one that Hezekiah built and the one that the Canaanites built around 1,000 years before the time of Hezekiah. So why did Hezekiah need to build a tunnel? Well, the system that the Canaanites built to divert the Gihon spring and to protect it, Jerusalem's most important water source, the reason that their tunnel was not so secure was because it had irrigation channels coming out from it. And they could have been large enough for a man to actually penetrate the city. Now, was one of those how Yoav ben Tzruiah, the commander of King David's army, did he use that to enter ancient Jerusalem and to take her by surprise and capture her at night? Maybe, and maybe King Hezekiah knew that story, and he knew that King Sennacherib was coming, and that he was the fiercest enemy that Israel had ever faced, and he needed to make an incredibly secure protection for the city of Jerusalem. And of course Sennacherib ends up not taking Jerusalem. He boasts about King Hezekiah that he has him shut up like a bird in a cage. But eventually Jerusalem is the city that Sennacherib does not take, just as the prophet Isaiah foretold that he would not come near the city. One of the most incredible discoveries in ancient Jerusalem in the last number of years is what has become known as the Pilgrim's Road. So if you can imagine that the children of Israel needed to come up to Jerusalem 3 times a year from wherever they lived. If they lived in the Galilee, they had to come to Jerusalem. If they lived in another nation, they had to come to Jerusalem. But all Israel was required to come up here. And what would actually happen would be that they would come up to this area, which is called the Pool of Shiloach, and they would come and they would use it as a huge ritual bath. And from this place, they would begin what was known as the final ascent. So they had already ascended, gone up, made aliyah from wherever they had come from. And now they had to make the final journey up towards the Temple Mount, where they would go and make sacrifices. And as they made the final ascent up this path, they would read or they would sing the Psalms of Ascent. So that's Psalm 119 up until Psalm 130 something. Approximately 15 Psalms of Ascent that they would read and sing joyously as they were going up to worship the Lord in Jerusalem. So in recent years we actually began to find pieces of this path. In fact, soon you will be able to walk it all the way from the bottom. This is the Pool of Shiloach, the place where Yeshua sent the blind man to wash. So you imagine the people coming, ritually immersing in this bath, and then they're going to start to walk up in this direction right towards the Temple Mount. Now what they actually discovered about this ritual bath is that it was used probably from around 3 years from
before the time that Yeshua was crucified in Jerusalem, right up to the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. In other words, the path was almost brand new when it was destroyed. It was only around 40 years old. We found incredible things on this path. We found things that relate to Pontius Pilatus, proving that he was a historical figure. What we also found, do you remember that in the description of the high priest's garment, there were 71 bells and pomegranates around the bottom? We actually found one of those bells with the ringer intact inside, and you could actually still hear the noise of it. So electronically, the sound of the high priest's garment has actually been recreated, so you can hear what he would have sounded like as he walked into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. So scripture actually says, prepare the highway, remove the stones, prepare the way of the Lord. And that is literally what the archaeologists are doing in ancient Jerusalem today. They're actually building a highway, removing the stones, and repairing this 2,000-year-old highway that it is very unlikely that Yeshua did not walk on 2,000 years ago. Is it possible that we are preparing the same highway for him to be able to walk up and for him to be able to come and rule and reign again from Jerusalem in our lifetime? Sometimes God works in really mysterious ways. In 2010, there was a sewage pipe running along here that took the sewage from the old city, and it burst and it needed to be repaired. So they called the repair people and they made an astonishing discovery. Where I have my feet right now are the steps that led down into the pool of Shiloach. We're talking about the place where Yeshua sends the blind man to wash the mud and the water off of his eyes so that he can see again. We are also talking about the place where at the Feast of Sukkot, something took place that was called the water libation ceremony. And they would take a silver flask and they would take water from the pool below here, they would take it up to the Temple Mount and they would pour it out on the altar. And it's at that moment, in this feast of great rejoicing, when all Israel is in Jerusalem, at the height of the excitement of the feast, when Yeshua comes and stands in the temple and he says, if any man is thirsty, and they looked at him and said, are you crazy? We're all thirsty. The sun is beating down on us. We haven't drank for hours. We're in the middle of the service in the temple and now they're pouring out water on the altar. And you're asking us if we're thirsty? And then he says that if we'll come and drink from him, he will give us streams of living water that will flow forth from our belly. So this is a hugely significant place in Jerusalem. This is where Hezekiahs Tunnel would have brought the water into the pool here, where it would have been stored at the bottom of Jerusalem. And there's so much incredible archaeology around us. There are basins for storing water. There's the rest of the tunnel that is bringing the water in this direction. But actually, most of the pool is hidden in this direction, and that is because the city of David does not own that property, and they would really love to buy it. But in Jerusalem, there are a lot of political issues that can complicate purchases of property. So in fact, the pool was enormous. It was around 60 meters by 70 meters, or around 180 feet by around 220 feet. So a massive pool, hugely significant discovery, again verifying the biblical narrative that there was such a pool at the bottom of Jerusalem that began the final ascent up to the Temple Mount, where the pilgrims would go 3 times a year.